That we will then move to item 3, which is consideration of formal charges by Master Trooper Dean Coates alleging that Louisiana State Police are not uniformly applying Louisiana State Police Commission pay rules as they relate to service tenure.
Good morning, Commission members. Brett Conrad and Mr. Coates next to me. I'll allow Mr. Coates to do the majority of the talking, but just as a brief, or I will be doing the majority of the talking. To the extent that the Commission has a question for Mr. Coates, I'd be happy to allow him to answer it. But the gist of the situation is that in 2014 and 2015, there was approval of a new pay grid for troopers. And that was approved by the Louisiana Commission and the Governor's Office. And that pay grid increased the pay for troopers. In 2015, there was a General Circular 180 that was introduced that created something called longevity pay. And previously, there had been some, as I understand it, there had been some confusion as to whether or not an increase in pay under Rule 6.14 was either merit-based or based on rank and seniority, in other words, years of experience. My understanding is that rule has been clarified, and to demonstrate that longevity pay is based on years of service and seniority rather than merit-based, and that's set forth in Rule 614. In other words, each year the trooper works, he gets an increase in longevity pay. That rule was approved by the Commission. That rule was approved by the Governor, Edwards, on October 12, 2016. As for Mr. Coates, he had not received any longevity pay from October 12, 2016 until, at best, September 19, 2017. Now, during that period of time, it's my understanding that there had been also some confirmation from the Executive Director that the longevity pay was prospective, meaning that it would apply going forward and that it was properly approved and that it was in effect for all troopers as of October 12, 2016. That did not get applied to Mr. Coates. In other words, there was a rule violation in terms of Rule 6.14. Now, also there was some concern with the rule violation in terms of 6.9 in terms of Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates in 2000, and correct me if I'm wrong, 18, was transferred from road unit over to internal affairs. When you look at Rule 6.9, it says whenever that, and excuse me, transfer is not the appropriate word, reassignment. When the reassignment happens, he doesn't get a reduction in pay. The pay scale carries with him. Well, the gap in time that Mr. Coates did not receive the longevity pay from October 12, 2016 through at least September 19, 2017 was never carried over, meaning there was a violation of Rule 6.9 and again of Rule 6.14. So we asked this Commission to exercise its authority under Rule 2.9C to investigate this rule violation, particularly in with respect to Mr. Coates. Thank you.
Any commissioners have any questions? Wasn't the pay increase subject to only being made applicable when there was, in fact, legislative approval of a portion of funds being made available for that pay increase? And has there ever been legislative appropriation of funds to fund that pay increase?
So my understanding is that at the time the new grid was implemented in 2015 or what have you, there was legislative budget approval for that money. I believe it was like $11 million. Longevity pay in the Rule 6.9 did not create additional funds. It just clarified that that money that has already been appropriated isn't based on merit, it's based on years of service and longevity, meaning that each year Mr. Coates works, he gets that 3% bump. That money had already been allocated with the new pay grid. 6.9 just clarified, hey, it's based on years of service and not based on merit.
When was the appropriation, before or after the change to 6.9?
That happened before, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
Let me talk to our advisor. substantive decision on these matters today. We're just trying to get enough information to decide what action, if any, we will take relative to investigating the matter. So at this point, it's probably not necessary.
Yes, sir, thank you.
And just as an aside, Commissioner, we don't have any evidence that demonstrates that it was not approved in that same regard. My understanding that in 2015, there was, and specifically House Bill 1, Act 16, had set forth that funding. And that had previously been approved by the Budgetary Commission that same year. And so all we're asking the commission to do is just to investigate this rule violation. As you said before, we're not asking this commission at this time to make a determination as to whether or not this rule was violated. That may come later. We're just simply asking the commission to investigate and utilize its powers under 2.9C to investigate a potential rule violation for 6.9, 6.14.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Sure, Commissioner Muir.
Are you aware if the department has recognized any other Rule 6 Rule 6 is, for example, 6.7, which is pay upon promotion since October 2016? Have they recognized that rule in regards to people being promoted after October 2016?
I believe they have. I believe that people aside in a different rule have received those promotions, but we're talking about a different situation. Your question, with all due respect, is a different situation with promotions and longevity pay. This is simply based on years of service,
Yes.
not whether or not somebody's getting promoted or not.
Sure, but what I'm bringing up is the fact that part of Rule 6 has been recognized by the department, but other parts of the rule have not been.
I'm unaware of the department not recognizing 6.14A and B. In fact, in 2017, I believe the executive director affirmed that this rule was implemented on the basis of service and was prospective from October 12, 2016. Just briefly to answer just to clarify some of the questions that have been asked, specifically in response to Mr. Muir, in 2017, I do believe that Rule 6.7 has been followed through with by the department, and that's with regard to the promotions. I think that was directly your question. It's my understanding that yes, that has occurred. And with respect to Mr. Simeon's question regarding the budget, we're here under 2.9C to determine whether or not there has been a violation of the commission rules, and nowhere in 6.14 does it talk about anything subject to a budgetary issue. Rather, it talks about and I'm reading specifically from the last line, a longevity step rate increase shall be granted to employees each year. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Just real quick, Mr. Chairman, I just want some clarity on this. When the longevity pay, it was instituted, I'm assuming that it's instituted in the prior budget year when they do the budget for the next year. So fiscal year Louisiana, July 1st, correct? So that the longevity pay takes effect that next year?
It took effect October 12, 2016, because that was when the governor approved it, and that was when it hadn't met all of the approvals, the governor, the commission, and the executive
I got
director.
you. So on October 16th, everybody that qualified under the
12, right. October.
the law, or October the 12th, received the 3% increase, or whatever the percentage was.
That is when the increase for everyone should have, across the board. With respect to Mr. Coates, that never happened.
Okay, and that's my question. So the 3% increase goes into effect October the 12th for everyone that qualifies under the law.
Correct.
And Mr. Coates did not receive the increase on October the 12th, 2016.
Correct. Whenever he was entitled to receive the longevity pay, when he would theoretically move into the next step, or whatever the phraseology is,
Okay.
that did not happen. While there has been subsequent attempts to catch him up, he still remains totally, that gap in time has never occurred.
Okay, when did he receive the longevity pay? When did he start receiving it? He didn't receive it on.
I believe September 19th, 2017.
Okay, so he didn't receive it until the next year.
Correct.
When everybody else had received. So he almost went a year without. the
Well,
longevity.
I don't know about everybody else. I know that Mr. Coates
Okay.
did not receive it.
But your assertion is that he didn't receive it for that period of time, 11 months.
Right, and so at the end of the day, he's still 2 years behind.
How's he 2 years behind? You said, oh, you got it in September of 18?
September of October.
When he began receiving on September 19th, he was already a year behind.
September
Excuse me,
19th of
excuse me.
2017?
2 years, right.
Oh, wait a minute. If they started in October 12th of 2016, and they started receiving it in September of 2017, that's a year. I mean, I went to school in Cattle Parish, but I think that's a year.
Mr. Crawford,
Yes.
the longevity pay, as I understand it, and there's plenty of questions with regarding the allegations in this
Sure.
request for investigation, but the longevity pay began in fiscal year 17.
Okay.
So that was the first year longevity pay began being implemented and being paid. So prior to that, there was no payments for longevity pay. So
And his contention is that he was never brought up to where he was supposed to be. And again, we're not asking the commission to rule today, we're just asking the commission to exercise its authority to look into this issue.
I don't have a problem with that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? At this time, I think it would be appropriate to entertain a motion to go into executive session in order to discuss the investigative proceeding regarding the allegations. We went into executive session on number three. Consideration of the formal charges by Master Trooper Dean Coates. Any public discussion from any of the commissioners on that particular matter?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in regards to the longevity pay, in the public discussion, it's very clear that it's very confusing as far as when it was implicated, when it was reinstated, and this catch-up period. So I'll be making a motion in regards to the executive director conducting an investigation in regards to longevity pay.
Any other discussion?
I would second
Okay. So you want to go ahead and make the motion?
So I want to make a motion ordering the executive director to conduct an investigation in regards to the Louisiana State Police uniformly applying the State Police Commission rules in regards to service tenure and report back January meeting.
We have a second. All right. It's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Not, all in favor?